I used to dread the second half of my cycle. I'd go from feeling energized, optimistic, and focused to overwhelmed, depressed, and emotionally fragile every single month. After a lot of experimenting and way too much trial and error, I realized that it wasn't just the stress or my hormones. It was how those hormonal changes were affecting my brain chemistry. Most people don't realize that PMDD is not just extreme PMS. It's actually a sensitivity to normal hormone fluctuations. And way more women fall somewhere on that spectrum than you'd think. Once I understood that, I stopped guessing and I started building a system that worked not just for me, but for other women too. So whether you've been officially diagnosed with PMDD or you just know that hormonal shifts impact your mood more than you would like them to, this video is for you. Hi, I'm Jess. I'm a licensed nutritionist who specializes in women's mental health. And in this video today, I want to share with you the method that I developed to help me feel as mentally and emotionally stable all month long, and how you can start applying some of these same principles to your own cycle. So let's get into it. Okay, let's talk about what we're going to cover in this video. So we're going to talk about first and foremost why PMDD is more than just extreme PMS and how hormonal shifts impact your brain. We're then going to briefly touch upon the current conventional treatments for PMDD, like birth control and SSRIs. And while these of course can help, they often miss the mark as long-term solutions, in my opinion. And then lastly, we're going to take a look at the 3 core pillars that absolutely have to be in place if you want to treat PMDD more holistically. And this is really the method that I developed for myself and that we're going to get into. Okay, so just a little bit more of a background on me. So like I shared, I am a licensed nutritionist. I'm a certified nutrition specialist. I'm a functional nutritionist. There's a lot of different names for it, but I just refer to myself as a clinical nutritionist because that's what I do. And what that really means is that I work with people one-on-one in clinical practice, and I have been in the functional medicine realm for nearly 10 years now. Over that time, I've helped hundreds of women with everything from hormonal imbalances to gut issues, metabolic health, burnout. But no matter what the main complaint was, mood is something that really always comes up for women. And I actually got into natural medicine myself because of my own hormonal concerns in my early 20s, and I spent years working on them. And eventually things did get better. My labs looked great, my cycle was regular, but even when everything seemed balanced on paper, I still didn't feel like myself for a big chunk of the month. And that's what really led me deeper into the world of mood and mental health, and I started really taking a deep dive into foundational nutrients, neurotransmitter pathways, and how to support things like anxiety and depression through nutrition. And that's partly how I developed my YouTube channel that is focused on nutrition for mental health. But the more that I learned in this realm, the more that I noticed a gap, especially when it came to women's mental health. So a lot of the nutritional psychiatry research and recommendations didn't really seem to account for hormonal rhythms and how these shifts affect the brain. But I knew that this really mattered because I had actually been researching PMDD for years. This is actually an article that I wrote when I was in grad school on PMDD. PMDD was something that I was really interested in and I personally really identified with, but I didn't love putting myself in that box because most people, including a lot of professionals, still think that PMDD is just really bad PMS or that it means that you have a simple hormonal imbalance. But it's not. So before we get into the 3 core pillars of what actually helps, we need to talk about what PMDD really is and why it affects your brain in a way that a lot of people, like I said, still don't really understand. So let's take a look at that. Most people think of PMDD as just really intense PMS. Mood swings, cramps, maybe some irritability, but the truth is PMDD is not just a hormonal issue, and it's not caused by hormone levels being too high or too low. It is actually about how your brain responds to completely normal hormone fluctuations. What does that mean? It means that PMDD is a condition of sensitivity. So it's a neurological reaction to hormonal shifts, especially after ovulation and the luteal phase of your cycle. And this sensitivity impacts your brain chemistry. So is it possible to have a hormonal imbalance and have PMDD patterns? 100%. If you do have a hormonal imbalance, it's going to make PMDD etiology worse, but you can have completely normal hormone fluctuations and have a lot of these symptoms. So let's break it down, okay? So your mood is heavily influenced by neurotransmitters. These are things like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. And these are chemical messengers that help regulate emotion, motivation, feelings of calm, and resilience. And basically what happens is that during the second half of your cycle, your brain's ability to produce, use, or respond to those neurotransmitters can change, especially if you're sensitive to hormonal shifts like those seen in PMDD. So this is kind of an example of what actually is going on. So when estrogen drops, serotonin is impacted. And when we have shifts in progesterone, GABA sensitivity changes. So oftentimes in PMDD, it's not really that your hormones are broken. It's that your brain becomes more vulnerable to stress and mood disruptions when those hormones shift. So let's look a little bit deeper at the etiology and what's going on in some of these women. So research shows that women with PMDD may have the following. So impaired serotonin signaling, which contributes to depression, anxiety, and overwhelm. Reduced GABA sensitivity, which affects your ability to calm down, sleep, and cope with stress. Dysregulation of the HPA axis, which is your body's stress response, which makes small triggers seem really huge, essentially. And then even differences in brain circuitry that increases emotional reactivity during the luteal phase. In other words, you're not imagining this. This is a real brain-based sensitivity, and that's why so many women feel like things completely shift when they hit their luteal phase. And this is actually why PMDD is classified and treated as a mental health depressive disorder and commonly treated with SSRIs, which is what I want to talk about next, conventional treatments. So now that we understand the etiology of PMDD, it makes sense why the common conventional treatments are SSRIs and birth control. So let's talk about SSRIs for a minute. So these are commonly prescribed because PMDD shares symptoms with anxiety and depression, and serotonin does play a key player in both. These can be taken daily or during the luteal phase, and for some women, it is very effective. So this is a percentage in a lot of studies that it shows that it does help 60 to 70% of women with PMDD. But SSRIs are complicated and they can come with side effects like emotional blunting, low libido, fatigue, or even digestive issues. Personally, I've never taken SSRIs, and that's not something that I'm proud of. I'm sure there was several times in my life where maybe I could have benefited from that. But because I have such sensitive brain chemistry, I've always been really cautious to take anything that may alter how I feel or something that I might become reliant upon, especially when it's not something that for me I would want to plan on being long term, right? So sometimes there's certain areas where don't really want to dip my toe into because I think for me personally that might just cause more ups and downs ultimately. And it's also important to know that SSRIs do deplete some nutrients that are actually critical for mental health, like B6 and folate and magnesium. And then there's birth control. which is prescribed for PMDD because it suppresses ovulation. And when you suppress ovulation, you reduce hormone fluctuations that trigger those symptoms. But birth control doesn't get to the root of PMDD. It's kind of like muting the hormonal rhythm instead of working with it. And for a lot of women, that just doesn't feel good, like mentally or emotionally or physically. So I kind of just want to run through a few scenarios where I think birth control misses the mark as a treatment for PMDD. So in my opinion, it doesn't address the root cause. So because PMDD is about sensitivity to changes and not the hormones themselves, suppressing ovulation doesn't resolve that sensitivity. And if things change and you have to come off of it, or even women who cycle on birth control, like the 3 weeks on, 1 week off, then they can still have a lot of those symptoms when they come off of it. Synthetic hormones can also still trigger symptoms, so especially synthetic progesterones, which these don't have the same calming GABA supporting effect as natural progesterone. And so for some women, this actually worsens their mood. Birth control also depletes key nutrients, very similarly to SSRIs, but actually way more. Birth control depletes a lot of nutrients. So basically, it's known to reduce levels of magnesium, B6, folate, zinc, and others that are really important for neurotransmitter balance and mental health. It's just not sustainable for everyone, right? So some women can't take birth control for medical reasons, like risk for blood clotting. Others want to plan to become pregnant, and maybe they're managing other health issues, or they just don't want to be on birth control long term. And then, of course, side effects of birth control sometimes mimic PMDD. So people have depression, low libido, mood swings, and then that can just feel exactly like the symptoms that it was prescribed to fix. So where does that leave us? This isn't about shaming any of these treatments. They absolutely have their place, especially in severe cases when women are suicidal, other options haven't worked, but they're not the right solution for everyone, okay? And that's what this is really about. And for many women, they might just be one piece of a puzzle, meaning an SSRI may have helped them a little, but maybe not to the extent that they wanted. Or, maybe someone has been on birth control and plans on coming off at some point. So what then are our options? This is where the 3 core pillars come in, and I'm really excited to share these with you. Over time, I started to realize something incredibly important, both for myself and a pattern that I was seeing in the women I was working with who were actually seeing progress with their mood. They had 3 key pillars in place, not 1, not 2, but all 3 of these, which is what we're going to cover today. Okay? So these 3 pillars is what became the foundation for what I now call the mood balance method, which is a 3-step nutrition system that I'll tell you more about later on in the video if you want to dive deeper. But I want to give you a bird's eye view of each and every one of these. So we're going to take a deeper look at foundational nutrients. We're going to take a look at diet, and we're also going to take a look at luteal phase support and what each of these essentially mean and examples for each one of them. Okay, so the first pillar is foundational nutrients for mental health. This is something that gets overlooked a lot. We hear a lot about hormone balance and neurotransmitters like serotonin or dopamine, but what most people don't realize is that your brain can't even make those neurotransmitters without specific nutrients in place. So this is what I got into when I was really working on optimizing people's mental health with nutrition. So if you go watch my channel, I'll have a lot of informational videos on why each of these nutrients are important. So to show you what I mean here, I want to take a look at this pathway, which is serotonin synthesis, okay? So every step of this process requires a nutrient cofactor. So we have B6, magnesium, iron, vitamin C, folate, just to convert tryptophan into serotonin. Okay, so if you're low in just one of these, your body might not be able to make enough serotonin, especially in that second half of your cycle when your PMDD starts to show up. So I'll give you an example. I had a client who had been on antidepressants and birth control for years. And when she started to supplement with folate, she felt like literally a completely different person. An interesting thing about this connection for her was that both SSRIs and birth control deplete folate, but there's even some studies that show that folate can be an effective adjunct treatment alongside of SSRIs for treatment-resistant depressive disorder, which I think is really interesting. But folate is just one example. There's a whole host of foundational nutrients for mental health, other B vitamins, B6 comes up a lot, B12, magnesium, omega-3 fatty acids. These are all nutrients that directly affect your brain chemistry. So the takeaway for this pillar is that if your brain doesn't have the raw materials that it needs to create these neurotransmitters, it can't regulate your mood as effectively. So no matter how clean your diet is, no matter how many mindfulness apps that you try, you're going to be missing the building blocks for some of these key processes. Okay, so the second pillar is diet. And even though it might sound similar to foundational nutrients, it actually serves a completely different purpose. You'll understand what I mean in a second. So while yes, we want to eat a nutrient-dense diet that is high in some of these foundational nutrients, the number one goal with the diet is to promote an anti-inflammatory state for the body and for your brain. So, oh, this is one of my salads that I made. I thought something else was coming up next on the slide. I really like beet salads. They're really good. So basically, in the diet, we're focusing on three things. We're focusing on lowering systemic inflammation. We're focusing on stabilizing blood sugar to reduce emotional crashes. Blood sugar is so huge when it comes to mood. And then we're removing mood triggers, so certain foods that actually can have a direct impact on someone's mood, and then adding foods that actively support neurotransmitters. So we're going to walk through a few examples here. Blood sugar and anxiety, like I mentioned. So one of the biggest mood disruptors I see, especially when it comes to anxiety and irritability, is blood sugar instability. So this is an example of an oatmeal spike from one of my clients. When your blood sugar surges really high and or when it crashes, your body sees this as a stressful event. Cortisol goes up, adrenaline spikes, and your mood can tank as well. But it's not just about sugar itself, like this is an example of oatmeal on its own that is known to spike people's blood sugar in the morning, but this could also be like skipping meals, relying on caffeine, eating carbs without enough protein and fat. So just getting your blood sugar balanced can reduce mood swings, anxiety, irritability, sugar cravings, and that feeling of being really emotionally fragile, which comes up more in that second half of your cycle. And then, of course, we want to focus on increasing our intake of some foods that really support mood. So we actually have certain compounds in food, they're called phytochemicals, flavonoids in particular, that are mood supportive and have natural antidepressant effects. So flavonoids support neurotransmitter function, they reduce neuroinflammation, and can even increase BDNF, which is brain-derived nootropic factor, which is kind of like a brain fertilizer for your mood, okay? So when it comes to diet, why this matters is because if you're eating foods that are inflaming your brain or your blood sugar is all over the place, no supplement is fully going to fix that. So this is why diet has to be part of the strategy. It is not the only strategy. So if you hear nutrition system, you may think, oh, this is just a diet. The diet is 1/3 of the process, but it's not about about being perfect. It's about a sustainable long-term strategy that is supportive of mental health. It's not like a 30-day cleanse or something like that, okay? So the third part of this system, luteal phase support, is where things really come together. And it's something that not a lot of people talk about. And it's essentially just changing your approach to be more targeted during the second half of your cycle. So most women are taught to treat their cycle like it's the same every day. But the truth is that your brain and your body are completely different post-ovulation. And the luteal phase over here, post-ovulation, is where most PMDD symptoms show up for women. So this pillar is really about adjusting nutrition, supplements, and even lifestyle factors. So you are supporting these increased physiological demands during this phase. As an example, I want to talk about L-tryptophan and PMDD. L-tryptophan, we saw this chart already before. This is the precursor to serotonin. This is an amino acid. So we get this from protein-rich foods. It's the highest in like animal protein foods. And studies have actually shown that women with PMDD have impaired serotonin function specifically during the luteal phase, and that women's symptoms are aggravated during tryptophan depletion. There is legit a study that says that. So it makes sense that increasing tryptophan during this window could basically help fill that gap or that increased need. It is important to note, thank you for my little reminder here, that tryptophan is not recommended for those on SSRIs. So that's actually the reason why I want to talk about tryptophan today, because while it's not one-to-one a swap out for an SSRI, they're not the same thing. They work on similar mechanisms of action and pathways. So this is why you wouldn't want to take them together, because it could potentially lead to something like serotonin syndrome. But if you're not on an SSRI, you're going to understand why this could potentially be an effective strategy to try during the second half of your cycle. So one study found that supplementing with tryptophan during the luteal phase did lead to a 34% reduction in PMDD mood symptoms, including anxiety, sadness, and irritability. So while the percentage isn't quite as high as what we see in some SSRI studies on PMDD, it's still within that range. And this is huge, especially for women who want options outside of pharmaceuticals, okay? So I use tryptophan in my own routine, but only in the second half of my cycle, because that's when it seems to make the biggest difference and have the biggest impact. It's also important to note that with some of these supplements, some people just may not be taking them the right way. In a lot of these studies, we often dose supplementation much higher than just what would maybe be on the back of the bottle. And then also with certain things like tryptophan, for example, it's really the most effective if you take it away from other things, including other supplements and food. So sometimes when people try something and they're like, this did nothing for me, there might be a little bit of just a gap there in terms of how to actually implement it in a way that's going to be effective. But I do also want to clarify that it's not just tryptophan. Other nutrients like magnesium have actually been shown to decline in the second half of the cycle, particularly for women with mood changes. And this can increase symptoms like anxiety, tension, irritability, and you might take magnesium all of the time. It might be part of your multivitamin, but you may benefit from taking more just during the luteal phase. So, as an example, in the mood balance method, I go through different common PMS and PMDD symptoms, whether that's more depressive based, anxiety, panic, fatigue, and I have specific protocols and nutrients that support that specific etiology that in theory you would implement mainly in that phase of your cycle, okay? So this pillar is really about targeted supplementation to support luteal phase needs, which includes nutrients, but it also may include herbs, stress support, or other lifestyle practices that you can do depending upon what those symptoms are. So the reason why these 3 foundations matter so much, these are the exact 3 foundations that I figured out for myself. And they didn't necessarily go in this order. Being a nutritionist, I actually would say that the diet piece came first, right? And then, like I mentioned, I got really into targeted nutrients for mental health. And when I still felt like there is a piece missing, I started doing more luteal phase experimentation. And that's when I felt like everything came together and clicked. And then once it clicked for me, that's when I started seeing the same pattern in women I was working with. A lot of them in the functional medicine world were getting some nutritional counseling on the first 2 steps and seeing a lot of improvement with, like, let's say, a cleaner diet and some basic nutritional supplements. But the targeted support that was related to hormonal health was really the missing piece. And that's when I realized that, this isn't just a checklist, it's a system. So I turned this into the mood balance method, which is a 3-step system for depression, anxiety, and PMDD relief. And I'm just gonna talk about it for a minute if you'd like to learn a little bit more about it. So if you're watching this and you feel like, wow, this explains so much, obviously, I want you to know that you can start applying some of this on your own. You can experiment with your diet, you can take a look at your nutrients, maybe start tracking how you feel after ovulation. But if you want a clear step-by-step way to do this, something that takes all of the guesswork out of it, that's exactly why I created the mood balance method. So to tell you a little bit more about it, it's more like a guided workshop than a long, overwhelming course. But inside it, I'm going to walk you through exactly what you need to know to, 1, support your brain chemistry with the right foundational nutrients, follow the mood balance diet, and that has done for you food lists, and templates and meal plans and things like that. You don't need to follow those, but they're there for you as a resource. And then I'm going to show you exactly how to adjust your supplements and strategies in that second half of your cycle when you're most vulnerable to mood shifts. So it's designed to be very practical, efficient, and easy to follow, even if you've already tried a million things. But most importantly, I wanted it to be really accessible. So right now, the mood balance method is incredibly affordable. While the exact cost may change in the future, my biggest goal was to make sure that this was something where women could get the support that they need without spending thousands of dollars on functional medicine care. And this isn't devaluing functional medicine. I work in functional medicine, and if you want to work one-on-one with me at some point and do personalized testing, that may be a possibility, but I'm going to require that everyone I work with goes through this framework so that we're just all on the same page about everything. So if this resonates with you and you want a shortcut to feeling more mentally and emotionally stable throughout your cycle, I'd love to have you join the program. You can click the link below that will take you to the landing page with all the nitty-gritty details, but I do really hope to see you inside. And if you want to stick around for some more PMDD content, then make sure you check out this video up here.